After a glorious morning, I'm willing for it. And so somebody has to be brave and tell me what they want to know. Who's got a question to put before the house?
I wondered why, when you were seeing that that art was more universal than literature because of the language that we thought about. No, art in general.
Oh.
What you thought about music.
Well, I mean all of the arts.
Yes, I know, but you were saying literature had the difficulties of language.
Music comes close, but I think they're more toned up deaf people.
No, blind people.
Yeah, and blind people. And there is there's a difference, which may be cultural difference, between the immediacy of something that you see and the structure of the music of some other country or some other time. And then, of course, the serious difficulty is that we don't have the music from Greece. You know, people, I know that musicologists make all these wonderful things about what it is, but I don't believe it. and as for Mesopotamia, you know, Egypt, all the places, we simply don't have the same thing's true of dance. We don't really have the same range. And yet we have, you see, in the visual arts, we have things from 80,000 BC. And really from almost every year after that, not really after that, but pretty year. So it's a much fuller body of experience in the visual arts.
I guess that why I said it was that I'm sometimes troubled that I try too hard with painting, or that I sort of bring whole insecurity to paintings, which I don't find with music at all.
No.
And so I didn't know if that was just me personally.
Well, I think now a lot of people have a perfectly natural and understandable sort of reluctance about the visual art because we see them under such terribly unnatural situations. There's nothing more destructive to the experience of art than a museum. But it's also the only place you can have it. So you're caught in that paradox again. It is terrible for the works themselves. They've been uprooted, deracinated, and put in places that never really belonged at all, and looked at as objects which are simply visual objects, not looked at for what they intended to be. Because almost all art of the entire world up through the 17th century was religious. It is the cause of the creation of most works of visual art. Because the thing that the artist can do and that is absolutely necessary is that he can make visible what's invisible. And it's essentially what he always does. And if you're painting a landscape, you are making visible, and take something like a sunset. Well, that will never be seen again by anybody, you see. But you've made this thing which is invisible because people weren't there, or because it's through passing or something. You've made it visible. And this is even truer, of course, of the gods, because they are never seen or seen in visions, which then have to be, made visible. So the whole action is to make something visible which is invisible, and that is characteristically the spiritual life, or the life of the divine. And so there they sit, in museums with one thing one conception of the crucifixion right next to one, which is the opposite. It tells an entirely opposite thing about it. And then that may be next to a still life of a bunch of oranges. And so everything is in this funny way visually equated, which is madly different. Just deeply and profoundly different, and longs for its own proper setting. It doesn't, it can't exist really. Is there like all of the strangers sitting there? And I always say, going to a museum is exactly like going to a cocktail party, an enormous cocktail party. Because what you do, you encounter these things, and because they're made by human beings, they're made in our image, and so they are like human beings, and you encounter them, you know, just lots of them, but you never can get to know them. And it's the same tantalizing thing that you have in a cocktail party, where you meet somebody and you think, oh, that's an interesting person. You may never see them again, you know, in this world because of the speed with which people withdraw from your scene. So it can't be like living with the thing. But the things that were made up to the 20th century, up to the 19th century, were made to be lived with. And I don't mean to be lived with comfortably. I don't mean like, you know, it goes with the drapes or something. I mean that you went back to it and went back to it. And it had its own special place, which was characteristic in a chapel or in a shrine or in a sacred book or somewhere that separated it and said where it was and what it was doing there. And then we invent museums. After all, they're very short time ago. There weren't any museums at all. There weren't even any way that you could see any works of art that weren't made right where you were, up again to the 17th century. So it's only this last 300 years. And I think that they will disappear in the next... I'm a great one for prophesying. I enjoy prophecy. And I like to prophesy things for about 200 years from now. I rarely prophesy for next week. But I do think that they will disappear. I think they will have to disappear, given, of course, that we all survive, and so on. And one reason is that they are acting as a substitution for religion for a great many people. That's why people go on Sunday. So they feel they have some kind of vague obligation to the spiritual life, and they heard that art had something to do with the spiritual life, so they go to museums. They're crowded on Sundays. You know. There are people who simply walk, looking mostly at the label, and that's it. And they've done their spiritual duty for the week. They can go back then the next week. But it's a feeling of some kind of spiritual obligation that they don't know how to, you know, dismiss otherwise. And of course it's absolutely insane at the present time, because art is not about that and is not trying to be. People used to know or be convinced, and properly, that art was elevating, that it developed the spiritual life, was elevating. But art has become as little interested in that as Jane Fonda. You know, it exists as a physical thing and wishes to brighten itself up as a physical thing, but it has no interest beyond that. Yes?
Kind of going along with that, we take our 8th graders to the art museum. And they come to the gallery, Barbara comes out and shows them a lot of pictures and talks about them and they go to the gallery and see these pictures. Is that a kind of approach for...
Well, it's
kind of, I mean, I know it's the way it's done, but with the way you're showing it here and the way you're saying living with art, I don't know, I just wondered about your opinion on it.
I know, well, there's really almost nothing else you can do. You see, that's the trouble. Because that's not very, you know, it doesn't work out very well because it's that business of being uprooted again. That the things don't have much relevance to them. And people tried at the beginning of the century, and to a certain extent at the end of the 19th century, you know, to say that art really was nothing but arrangement of forms, and that it was that what satisfaction we got from it was not from what it was about, the subject matter at all, but just that this form balanced that form and that form another, and here was texture and here was color, and they spent all their time doing that in classes and in any art history. That was a type of criticism. It was called formal criticism, just like in literature, the same thing happened. in which there's an effort to disassociate the form from the meaning. And you can do that to a remarkable degree until the people only see the form. And yet this is a very, I think, disastrous thing to do. To completely bad news for people. And it was for art too, so that art became more and more something which could only interest other artists at all. It became in the sense they say that it's not a technical preoccupation, but it's an absolute technical preoccupation. It's how to make a picture. And in fact, there are books called that, how to make a picture. And it's as if the picture had nothing to do with what it's saying. And that's so strong that, most places that you go and most people that you hear talk about it would say that you're not supposed to be interested in the subject matter. At the minute you're interested in the subject matter, you're not interested in the thing aesthetically. You're only interested in it for the subject matter. But of course that's where we live. That's where we are, where meaning is, not where just aesthetic preoccupations are. And they're very dangerous too, I think, if people begin to be only concerned with the aesthetic. They get disassociated from the world. I consider it very disastrous for people. And long ago in the Second World War, it was very vividly demonstrated, and it was scandal to the world, but it shouldn't have been, because the people were doing that altogether, really. When the son of Mussolini said that dropping a bomb, looking down on a bomb which had dropped, it unfolded like a rose. And everybody was horrified, you see, because they knew that was a purely aesthetic, absolutely uninterested only interested in the form, not interested in what was happening, not interested in what was being destroyed, and the people, actual people with agony and killed, was of no interest to him. Why? Because he was high enough above, so he couldn't hear them scream. And all he could do was see this beautiful unfolding of the bomb. Well, the aesthetic life can become like that for the aesthetic. I always have such an equivocal feeling about people say, we make an art of life. Well, you're not supposed to do that. It's not right. You're supposed to recognize that life and art are separate things. And art, it can't be unlike life, and it can't be remote from life, but it has to be separate from life. And they mustn't be made to be like it. And something funny happens when it is, and we get what people call preciousness. People become precious, and then they sort of lose any blood. No guts to the thing. And of course, art has become so much involved with the aesthetic matters, and it's partly because you see this funny thing happened. The Depression came along in this country and in other countries, and they had a whole lot of artists who were unemployed. Well, the artists up to 1935, or whenever WPA began, didn't know there was such a thing as an unemployed artist. Because they didn't know there was such a thing as an employed artist. And so there has to be an employed artist before you know you're an unemployed artist, and nobody knew they were unemployed. And then suddenly there was such a thing as an employed artist. And from that time on, artists thought they ought to be employed. They got that. The idea very quickly caught on. And so, from just working for the government, they began to look for jobs that would be and at the same time, you had really this kind of sentimental idea that art was elevating and refining, and that if you had enough art that you would be refined and elevated. No conception of whether the art itself was refining and elevating or degrading and repulsive, none at all. And not feeling that you should make that distinction. And so then the art enters the universities, and so finally what you have mostly is university-trained artists who very easily believe in the aesthetic and the virtues of form without any concern. This morning I'm praying for you. And so somebody has to be brave and tell me what they want to know. Who's got a question to put before the house?
I wondered why, when you were seeing that painting, that art was more universal than literature because of the language. You read art. No, art in general.
Oh.
Why did you think about music?
Well, I'm in all of the arts.
Right, yes, I know, but you were saying literature has a difficulty
I
with
think
language.
that music comes first, but I think they're more toned up deaf people.
No, blind people.
Yeah, than blind people. And there is there's a difference which may be cultural difference between the immediacy of something that you see and the structure of the music of some other country or some other time. And then, of course, the serious difficulty is that we don't have the music from Greece. You know, people, I know that musicologists make all these wonderful things about what it is, but I don't believe it. and as for Mesopotamia, you know, Egypt, all the places, we simply don't have the same thing is true of dance. We don't really have the same range. And yet we have, you see, in the visual arts, we have things from 80,000 BC. And really from almost every year after that, not really after that, but pretty years. So it's a much fuller body of experience in the visual arts.
I guess that why I said it was that I'm sometimes troubled that I try too hard with painting, or that I sort of bring whole insecurity to paintings, which I don't find with music at all.
No.
And so I didn't know if that was just me personally.
Well, I think now a lot of people have a perfectly natural and understandable sort of reluctance about the visual arts. Because we see them under such terribly unnatural situations. There's nothing more destructive to the experience of art than a museum. But it's also the only space you can have it. So you're caught in that paradox again. It is terrible for the works themselves. They've been uprooted, deracinated, and put in places that never really belonged at all, and looked at as objects which are simply visual objects, not looked at for what they intended to be. Because almost all art of the entire world up through the 17th century was religious. It is the cause of the creation of most works of visual art. Because the thing that the artist can do, and that is absolutely necessary, is that he can make visible what's invisible. And it's essentially what he always does. And if you're painting a landscape, you are making visible, and take something like a sunset. Well, that will never be seen again by anybody, you see. But you've made this thing which is invisible because people weren't there, or because it's through passing or something. You've made it visible. And this is even truer, of course, of the gods, because they are never seen, or seen in visions, which then have to be, made visible. So the whole action is to make something visible, which is invisible, and that is characteristically the spiritual life, or the life of the divine. And so there they sit, in museums, with one thing one conception of the crucifixion right next to one, which is the opposite. This tells an entirely opposite thing about it. And then that may be next to a still life of a bunch of oranges. And so everything is in this funny way visually equated, which is madly different. I mean, deeply and profoundly different and longs for its own proper setting. It can't exist really. Is there like all those strangers sitting there? I always say going to a museum is exactly like going to a cocktail party, an enormous cocktail party. Because what you do, you encounter these things, and because they're made by human beings, they're made in our image, and so they're like human beings, and you encounter them, just lots of them, but you never get to know them. And it's the same tantalizing thing that you have in a cocktail party, where you meet somebody and you think, oh, that's an interesting person. You may never see them again, in this world because of the speed with which people withdraw from your scene. So it can't be like living with the thing. But the things that were made up to the 20th century, up to the 19th century, were made to be lived with. And I don't mean to be lived with comfortably. I don't mean like, it goes with the drapes or something. I mean that you went back to it and went back to it. And it had its own special place, which was characteristically in a chapel or in a shrine or in a sacred book or somewhere that separated it and said where it was and what it was doing there. And then we invent museums. After all, they're very short time ago. There weren't any museums at all. There weren't even any way that you could see any works of art that weren't made right where you were, up again to the 17th century. So it's only this last 300 years. And I think that they will disappear in the next... I'm a great one for prophesying. I enjoy prophecy. And I like to prophesy things for about 200 years from now. I rarely prophesy for next week. But I do think that they will disappear. I think they will have to disappear, given, of course, that we all survive, and so on. And one reason is that they are acting as a substitution for religion for a great many people. That's why people go on Sunday. So they feel they have some kind of vague obligation to the spiritual life, and they heard that art had something to do with the spiritual life, so they go on to museums. They're crowded on Sundays, by people who simply walk, looking mostly at the label, and that's it. Then they've done their spiritual duty for the week. They can go back then the next week. But it's a feeling of some kind of spiritual obligation that they don't know how to, dismiss otherwise. And of course, it's absolutely insane at the present time, because art is not about that, and it's not trying to be. People used to know or be convinced, and properly, that art was elevating, that it developed the spiritual life and was elevating. But art has become as little interested in that as Jane Fonda. It exists as a physical thing and wishes to brighten itself up as a physical thing, but it has no interest beyond that. Yes?
Kind of going along with that, we take our 8th graders to the art museum. And they come to the gallery, comes out and shows them a lot of pictures and talks about them in the gallery and see these pictures. Is that kind of approach for... I know it's the way it's done, but with the way you're showing it here and the way you're saying living with art, I don't know, I just wondered about your opinion on it.
I know, well, there's really almost nothing else you can do. You see, that's the trouble. Because that's not very, it doesn't work out very well, because it's that business of being uprooted again. That the things don't have much relevance to them. And people tried at the beginning of the century, and to a certain extent at the end of the 19th century, to say that art really was nothing but arrangement of forms, and that it was that what satisfaction we got from it was not from what it was about, the subject matter at all, but just that this form balanced that form, and that form another, and here was texture, and here was color, and they spent all their time doing that in classes and in any art history. That was a type of criticism, which was called formal criticism, just like in literature, the same thing happened. in which there's an effort to disassociate the form from the meaning. And you can do that, to a remarkable degree, until the people only see the form. And yet this is a very, I think, disastrous thing to do. Completely bad news for people. And it was for art too, so that art became more and more something which could only interest other artists at all. It became in the sense they say that it's not a technical preoccupation, but it's an absolute technical preoccupation. It's how to make a picture. And in fact, there are books called that, how to make a picture. And it's as if the picture had nothing to do with what it's saying. And that's so strong that, most places that you go and most people that you hear talk about it would say that you're not supposed to be interested in the subject matter. At the minute you're interested in the subject matter, you're not interested in the thing aesthetically. You're only interested in it for the subject matter. But of course that's where we live. That's where we are, where meaning is, not where just aesthetic preoccupations are. And they're very dangerous too, I think, if people begin to be only concerned with the aesthetic. They get disassociated from the world. I consider it very disastrous for people. And long ago in the Second World War, it was very vividly demonstrated, and it was scandal to the world, but it shouldn't have been, because the people were doing that altogether, really, when the son of Mussolini said that dropping a bomb, looking down on a bomb which had dropped, it unfolded like a rose. And everybody was horrified, you see, because they knew that was a purely aesthetic, absolutely uninterested only interested in the form, not interested in what was happening, not interested in what was being destroyed, and the people, actual people with agony and killed, was of no interest to him. Why? Because he was high enough above, so he couldn't hear them scream. And all he could do was see this beautiful unfolding of the bomb. Well, the aesthetic life can become like that for the aesthetic. I always have such an equivocal feeling about the people say, we make an art of life. Well, you're not supposed to do that. It's not right. You're supposed to recognize that life and art are separate things. And art, it can't be unlike life, and it can't be remote from life, but it has to be separate from life. And it must be made to be like it. And something funny happens when it is. And we get what people call preciousness. People become precious. And then they sort of lose any blood. No guts to the thing. And of course, art has become so much involved with the aesthetic matters. And it's partly because, you see, this funny thing happened. The Depression came along in this country and in other countries, and they had a whole lot of artists who were unemployed. Well, the artists up to 1935, or whenever WPA began, didn't know there was such a thing as an unemployed artist. Because they didn't know there was such a thing as an employed artist. And so there has to be an employed artist before you know you're an unemployed artist, and nobody knew they were unemployed. And then suddenly there was such a thing as an employed artist. And from that time on, artists thought they ought to be employed. They got that. The idea very quickly caught on. And so, from just working for the government, they began to look for jobs that would be and at the same time, you had really this kind of sentimental idea that art was elevating and refining, and that if you had enough art that you would be refined and elevated. No conception of whether the art itself was refining and elevating or degrading and repulsive, none at all. And not feeling that you should make that distinction. And so then the art enters the universities, and so finally what you have mostly is university-trained artists who very easily believe in the aesthetic and in the virtues of form without any concern for content. So it's a difficult thing, but when you take people to a museum, or when you yourself go to a museum, it's very, very hard to experience the work. And it really is just awfully, awfully difficult. And there are all kinds of devices that you can use. You can say that I will not look at but 4 pictures. And I will spend 1 hour or 2. But I will not even look at the others. I'll be led blind past the others. And I'll really look at them and really try to enter into them and experience them. But you know, how many people are going to do that? That's just not, it's not economical, you know, of your time. So it's a very, very difficult. Art is in a deplorable state at the present time. There's no question about it, and the appreciation and enjoyment of it is in a deplorable state. As you could see by that painting of the Judgment in Paris. That painting, see, first of all, was painted, second was bought, third was put in a museum, fourth had a slide made of it. See, all of those are judgments saying this is something we certainly need. And so, and that's what we have. And it's very, you know, I don't know, it's a very difficult, of course it's a terrible time to live for all of us. And there's a great Chinese curse which is put on people. May your children live in an interesting time. Yes, you want to ask?
Well, basically, essentially what you were talking about right at this time, I was thinking about the painting by the California artist, The Judgment of Paris, and you were talking about how it related to the situation in the state of art, but you've been talking about how art also reflects the values of the society and the culture and such. In Germany, they couldn't imagine the vision of a new figure. What exactly, elaborating in that sense, does that painting say about the state of society?
First thing it tells me,
and is there something that art can do in appreciating art? How you're talking about empathy, and through the work of art, and maybe through education more broadly, to escape that?
It does, because it does inform you as well as you inform it, and eventually inform you. And I think one of the first and most conspicuous things that particular painting does is tell you about the hatred of the body, hatred of the physical self. That is very important, I think, for people in the 20th century. They can't accept their physical selves, and so they do all kinds of things like diet and exercises and all these things, obsessively do them, because of this deep dissatisfaction, anguish over their physical selves. And I think that's part of the whole thing that every single one of us in this room has had to endure all his and her life, and that is a general feeling of the disvalue of man, of human beings. And now, at my age, as a young child, I was threatened with the population explosion, just exactly as everyone in this room. The idea that there can be too many people very easily, and that you can, the best thing you can do is not increase this number by any sizable amount. And, you know, everybody knows that you can't get too much of a good thing. And therefore, your conclusion is that people are not a good thing, because you can very easily get too much of them. And there's no relief from that now. You hardly can. Our birth rate now is down to 1.7. We're not even, you know, replacing ourselves. And still people are agitating about there being a population explosion, there being too many people. And it gives you a kind of a base of hatred, or base of fear, or distrust, or contempt, or something for human beings. And I think it just goes through everything. I think that we cannot accept ourselves, and we cannot admire ourselves. And it doesn't matter what we do, you know, like something extraordinary, like going to the moon, or you know, dying for a cause doesn't impress us. And then all of the explanations that are given us about ourselves are always negative ones. If we're generous, it's because we want people to admire us. If we do any charitable works, it's because it gives us satisfaction. Well, of course it gives you satisfaction, but there's a lot of other ways that you can get satisfaction. hot fudge sundaes, you know, all kinds of available. You don't have to go into cocaine, you know. You can just, they're just endless hot baths and God knows what that make you feel a whole lot more comfortable than giving $5 to somebody, or $500. We explain ourselves constantly by the lowest common denominator of any human experience. And that everything is really the reverse. If we're kind, it's because we're actually cruel. You know what? Who in the hell would believe that, you know, if it weren't being stated all the time by psychologists? I mean, it's really extraordinary. If we do something that's generous, it's because we're selfish. If we do, you know, it's always reversed. Whatever it is, but it's reversed downward. It's never that we do something mean because we're really kind, you know, or we do something that's selfish because we're really so generous. There's never any suggestion of that. It's always the baser thing. It's always taken to be the real thing, and the other thing is, she had a question first. So.
I don't know if you've read the book, Has Modernism Failed by Susie Goblin? What? Has Modernism Failed? The book by Susie Goblin.
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of Susie Goblin?
But somebody else recommended it.
She goes around giving lectures.
Yeah, I know it. I've got to read it. I haven't read it.
The thesis is that art is in a terrible place, and then if it got back to the spiritual, then art would once again reach the heights that it once had. But it seems to me that art reflects the society.
You're right. The art doesn't
master spiritual.
You're right. Absolutely. You can deplore the situation, but you can't do anything about it. Because I think, I always say, and it seems to me still true, that art is always concerned with reality. It just depends on what reality. But it always is concerned with reality. It never is concerned with any kind of passing thing, even when it seems to be. Those things are then real to that person. So that if it's fashion, to that person, fashion is a real thing. And anything else is just, you know, no value, no meaning. And I think this is true simply because it takes a while to make any kind of work of art, and therefore you want it to, you only will invest that time and those choices on the basis of reality. You won't do it just for foolishness or just to be something or other, you know. And consequently, well, where does our idea of reality come from? And it comes from another source, not art. And you can see that happen if you study the history of art. You can see it, absolutely. Exactly as you could see the difference between the Madonna of Cimabue, that early Madonna, where the reality of the world was actually an invisible world. The world was held in the hands of God. And nothing existed, you see. If you slipped from the mind of God, it was just like Russia. It was not only that you no longer existed, you never had existed. If you were not present in the mind of God, it was just simply, it was that kind of marvelous non-person you became. So that it wasn't just the future or the present that was taken care of, it was the past. So you were just erased, absolutely erased. But the thing which was enduring was the saints, was the image of God, the image of Christ, of the Virgin. These were the real things. These were the enduring things. These and other things had only this very passing and relatively uninteresting, no matter how complex and interesting they got. Well, that lasted only a certain length of time. And you could say that it lasted best when the world was actually very uncomfortable to live in. As you can see that happening in Rome. You see from those marvelous portraits of the Roman, at the time of the Roman Republic, absolutely powerful, and always it just impressed me so because the men have short hair and no beards. Now you figure that out without an electric razor or without any kind of a razor, and you know what, no steel, you know what they used? Oyster shells. Morning and night, and imagine caring enough about being clean shaven to scrape yourself with oyster shells twice a day. I mean, it's just an astounding thing, just an amazing thing. And it isn't until the barbarians from the north came along with their beards and their long hair that the Romans thought, oh, that's sort of cute, and began to do it. And the Roman women, the Roman women would pay enormous sums for blonde hair. They'd get all those Swedes and Norwegians are dark, but the Swedes, to cut off their hair and send it to Rome, they got fortunes for it. And they just grow some more. You know, it was a great trade house industry. And the Roman women then would have these wonderful wigs. And of course they loved wigs. One of the great things about Rome, I can never resist telling people, is that Roman women had themselves sculpted bald. And then they'd have new wigs sculpted to put on their heads. I mean, their bald heads. Not for their own bald heads, but for their sculpture. So that they didn't have that embarrassment that people in our time can have when they see their high school photograph. Bouffant hairdos or something, you know, absolutely mad, and clearly dating them, clearly saying, okay, it was 30 years since you got out of high school. And so they never had to face that. They'd have the chicest hairdo on their sculpted portrait of themselves as a young girl. All of their lives. They just changed their wig. Now, nobody else ever thought of that. Nobody else was ever so passionately engaged with the idea of a portrait as the Roman people were. But that was their wonderful solution to it. So it's a curious thing, what desire, what convictions about the world. And as the world got more and more difficult for the Romans, you know, it really got terrible. I mean, in the time of Jesus, I'm awful on figures, but it was something like maybe 30 or 40% of the people in Rome were not Romans. They were foreigners. And then it got higher and higher, and then of course, you know, Rome fell. If there's anything that everybody knows and nobody can explain, it's that Rome fell, and it did. And when it did, they stopped absolutely doing any portraits. They were not interested at all. It no longer had any concern. They had no longer any real concern, and instead they sculpted figures that looked exactly as though they'd just been hit over the head with a large club. Like that. Huge eyes, enormous eyes, and looking over everybody's head. It's just totally different, you see, because the world had really changed between the 1st century AD and the 3rd century AD. Very deeply, deeply changed. And it changed in the idea of what was real. They couldn't get anybody to be in the army, they couldn't do anything. But the barbarians, they didn't have to fight them, they just moved in, and suddenly it became that. So art does not lead the way. It always is philosophy or religion or an interpretation of the real nature of the world.
Would you say, though, that the period of the Mexican Revolution is to be
That what?
during the Mexican Revolution and the Mexican mural paintings, it seemed to me art was leading the way in teaching lessons and bringing out a whole new reality, like Diego Rivera and those. The propagandistic art, isn't that intent to lead the way?
Well, sometimes, yes.
Sometimes I relate that to art of the Middle Ages with teaching lessons.
Well, it's not. Propaganda is. That's a funny word. In a way, we think of propaganda as something which is an excessive statement in order to influence people. Isn't that what you would think of it? And that occurs, but it doesn't occur in like the Middle Ages. That's not characteristic. They did what they believed. And of course, if you believe something, if you really believe something, you want other people to have the benefit of that belief. You know, you don't want to just sit in a corner and believe it. I wouldn't be here if that were true. You know, I could sit at home and say, oh yes, that's it. But instead, I want you to know, because I believe that the arts reveal ourselves to ourselves and release ourselves from ourselves, and that this is the most valuable thing in the world. And that's why nobody, no human being, no society has ever been discovered which didn't have art, never has been one. I'm not talking just about pictures. I'm talking about all of the arts, the art of ritual, the art of drama, of music, of dance, of painting, of sculpture, all of them. But they are the thing that we have to have. We have that level of self-consciousness that makes us know that we're going to die. And it makes us know that we are what we are, and that you remember coming over you in stages in your early life when you were a child, and you thought that you could be anything or do anything. And you thought, you know, that there was no sense of any limit. Isn't that true? Do you remember that feeling? And I suppose it's because we remember it that we so much need to refresh ourselves with it. I mean, to feel it again in the arts. But you think, and I tell you, I seriously thought I could be a horse when I grew up. I mean, I thought you had choice. You see, and that if you wanted to be a horse when you grew up instead of a person, there was nothing to stop you. Same as people next door who wanted to be a movie star or wanted to be a ballerina or an era, whichever, they don't have any sense that it's impossible. I mean, they don't have any sense of the possible, so they don't know the impossible. So that is something that you gradually see, and you gradually know that this is going to be it. By the time you're 20, you should know that you'll never weigh 900 pounds or 22 pounds. You are at the, this is your inhabitation place, this is where you are. And because we're so limited, you've got to face that, and we all have to face that. And then gradually you face that you're never going to be president of the United States. And if that was part of your dream, as I faced I never was going to be a horse quite early on. But the other things have to come more slowly, you see. When you begin to see, this is lopped off, that's lopped off, these are no longer possibilities. And that sense of gradual imprisonment until you're down to 6 feet of the earth, or 2 feet of the urn, whatever it is, or 0 feet of being, whatever that is that the nuclear bomb does, just disperse us into our atoms without any in-between stages. But that, it is a pulling down, and so if you don't escape, if you don't move out of that, you're really in a terrible, and people won't put up with it. That's always true. They won't put up with it. They don't do it. Instead, they listen to the radio, they listen endlessly to popular songs, they look at television, they do anything. And that allows them to escape. That's all there is to it, because they have to. Because we all have to. And so the only question is whether it's going to be an escape that means anything or whether it isn't. That's the only question. And it's very, very difficult to find, to be able to escape into something that is really larger than you are and expands you and doesn't destroy you. It's very, very difficult. And I suppose that I think that the arts can do that. I think any dedication can do it. Dedication to mathematics, dedication to chemistry or something can do it. Yeah.
The downgrading of the human condition you spoke of before, is that typical of just Western civilization?
No,
or is that permeates even Eastern? You believe in the unity of man?
It's a worldwide thing. In fact, one of the things which is so really always to me remarkable and not at all easy to understand or to have anybody explain to you is that what happens seems to happen all over the world. So that if you look at the rise of civilizations, they all arose at almost the same time. Why? So they just all mysteriously arose around the 3rd millennium. And that's when they started. And they started in Egypt, they started in India, they started in China, they started in the Mediterranean, and that's about all the places anything ever did start. See, after that, nothing started. I mean, you have to consider that the Oriental ones came to this country because it clearly came across the Bering Straits and built a civilization. But why did this happen? And why were they marked by what they are even then? For instance, in India, the very earliest things that we have from India are about 3000 BC, and they look exactly like Indian things today. You can go to Cost Plus and find one exactly like it. And not because it's a copy of it, see, not because of that, but because that's what is generated. You know, it may be something falling from the sky or rising from the earth or whatever. And in Egypt, you have those people, you know, those people, everybody knows them. Their feet on sideways and their torsos front and their heads on the side. Now, they started that around 4000 BC and they never gave it up. They loved it. And nobody else ever thought it was so great, you see. Nobody. It's a very funny thing, you know. It's really very extraordinary. But nobody can possibly explain, at least not to my satisfaction. And you know that among the anthropologists they have this endless discussion of whether it's what do they call it, not dispersion, but something like that, or sui generis, whether the thing arose or whether it was through trade and this and that and the other. But anyway, it's very hard to explain. But the science always keeps us with such wonderful mysteries. My favorite is the one that was just a few months ago, where the biologist decided that everybody in the world was descended from a black lady in Africa. You like that? I just adore it. And then the next week somebody came out and said it was a Chinese lady in China. And I don't know whether these two are going to meet on the field or not. But it's so great, you know, to get back to Eve by the benefits of science after science has spent 200 years making fun of Eve is a hilarious, great irony of our time. You couldn't ask for more. You just couldn't ask for more. And there they've got Eve, looking him right in the face, either one color or another, but Eve. Starting the whole human race with all of its diversity. And all of us sitting here, you see, descended from either. I wish they'd make up their mind, because it's nice you could sort of face one direction or the other. Contemplating your origins. Anyway, it's so great, isn't it? What a great thing. What a blessing that we have those people doing all that stuff. For our entertainment. Just the absolute command forces that the greatest pharaohs never had. So I don't know what's true and what isn't about it, but I love it. Yes?
I'd like to explore the idea of escape a little bit more. You said a few things about it. Do you feel that escaping is the only real way of learning in your definition? And then, if that's the case, then what about the relative frequency of escaping? For example, I go home and my wife is continually in books and reading and escaping. And I find myself never escaping. Can you comment about the value of escaping and can you do it too much? Can you not do it enough? I'm using the word in the way you defined it, not more loosely.
Yes, you can do it. You see, we have this wonderful gift that we can abuse anything. We can abuse it. It does not matter. We are infinitely imaginative in our powers to abuse whatever it may be. The great remark which was made a long time ago, which was that Tallulah Bankhead could make a vice of crochet. You see, that takes a great skill. That's a very, very skillful person, enormously skilled in the vices that can do that. So you can make, I know, my sympathies to your wife and mainly to you. I have certain vices and one of them is reading. And you can always tell a vice for two things. One is that you do it when you ought to be doing something else and you know you ought to be doing something else. And the other thing is you keep pushing it on other people. If you ever go to the home of a drunk, you will not be happy until you're drunk. You see, well, you have a little bit, well, can't I pour a bit more? You know, it's the longing of people caught in a vice to get other people caught in a vice is one of the most remarkable things in the world. Shows the power of the devil, because no one ever tries to push their virtues on anyone else. You know? I don't understand it, but they never do. Be kind, you know. Be generous. I mean, you never go to anybody's house and have them tell you that.
It's a very funny thing, and if any of you have any explanation of it, I'd be delighted to hear it, because I've been puzzling over it for years. But it's absolutely true. You can tell it's a vice. And I have a vice of horses. I have more vices. I once said you should never have but 2. You can't afford more unless you're enormously rich. And here I have 3, but fortunately, 3, I think that's all, isn't it? Anyway, I know I have reading, and I know I have horses, and I know I have talking, so it's fortunately the horse is the only thing that is very expensive, and they're not that. Of course, again, ask an alcoholic what he pays for liquor. They're not that expensive. They are. I could live like a queen if I didn't have 4 horses. And I just had 2 colts. So. Now there's vice for you. Think if your wife had that. Keep her on that one, because that's a nice one. That's relatively inexpensive. And it's something that somebody once said about painting that I've absolutely adored ever since. Somebody said, "Oh, why do you paint?" She said, "It doesn't make any noise." And then you think of the other arts, and they're all noisy, In music literature, there you're typing away, keeping people up all night with that tackety-tack, and music, of course, is so awful you can't even rent if you're a musician. And when the sculpture's the worst of all, is you've got to be on the first floor, and you're just awful. You're making a big mess and a big noise. But painting, quietly away. Just perfect urban art. You're not going to offend anybody unless you show them what you do. Which is also an uncontrollable impulse. So do keep your wife on her reading. And it is true that you can, but of course, like any vice, it can corrode your other activity.
So now you're defining learning as a vice. Right? No, are you saying that, in fact, in a very serious note, that learning can be a vice?
Oh, yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So life is more encompassing than just learning?
Yes, absolutely.
We have to be about other things?
I don't think, see, we can't help learning. We learn all the time. We just do, that's all. There's nothing else to do. I mean, we're that kind of creature that's always taking in information. It may not, obviously, most of it is not very important information.
But to learn, we have to escape, right? I mean, to really learn something.
Yes,
so
yes.
We're continually going in and out of this trance
Yes.
sort of thing.
I agree. And it can become, it can become destructive. Of course, everybody knows that. If somebody, that's why I tell people they should never marry an artist. Never under any circumstances marry an artist. Because they will, they will care more for what they're doing than what's going on, because it's their great escape, and it's a great thing that they, in doing it, it's a great joy. And so other people are sacrificed to it without even knowing that they're being sacrificed, And then sometimes, of course, they do know they're being sacrificed. But this is not just the arts. This can be something like, anything that you're devoted to. And there's a great man who taught at Caltech a long time, Richard Feynman. I think he's still there. And his second wife, I think it was, divorced him after leaving on the note, on the bureau, a note saying, I'm getting out. It was the first inkling he had. And that everything wasn't just them. And she had about it, fit to be tied for years. I mean, she was fit to be tied, and she was tied, and she thought enough. And it came as a big surprise. He had an inkling that anything wasn't just lovely.
Most men don't.
Absolutely, it's one of the great differences between men and women, of which I spend my time trying to emphasize all of them, because I'm desperately and passionately devoted to the separation of the sexes. So I think life is confusing enough without making that confusing. So the fact that men are not so aware is not a cultural thing of what's going on in relationships. This is where women have specialized for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. Their specialty is interrelationships, and it is a concern with it, a watching for it, and therefore they have characteristic of much stronger empathic reaction than men have, much more immediate and easily got at empathic reaction than men have, because they are alert to that, and so they feel, what does this really mean? You see, what's really going on here, and not what is at the surface, but what through body language and through just the empathic recognition that this person is, well, you know, whatever it is. And many people don't have that very keenly developed. But some, of course, when men get it highly developed, they are absolutely marvelous at it. That's why the most highly paid salesmen are men. And the salesman has to empathize into the other person. He has to, particularly that wonderful group of salesmen that are called closers, who are just brought in, like, what do they do in football, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, they're just brought in when they consider that the time is right. And the man has that extraordinary skill of empathizing totally, so that when he feels the person withdrawing, just this least bit, he changes. And when he feels them falling for it a little bit, he knows that that's the time. He gives them the pen. See, so it's really a very, very high, and of course very, very highly paid gift. And I don't mean dependent economically or anything, but they're emotionally more dependent. Maybe because of this gift that they have it, but they definitely are. So, well, you have a much greater sense of it when you're in love with somebody, don't you? You know their meanings, you know their reactions, you know what they're feeling, and you know what's going on, because you can empathize much more readily with people that you love, simply because you're more watchful, nothing else. They are the center of your life, you therefore, why would you be looking anywhere else? You see, you're looking at them. So that looking is a way of losing yourself. And what does this mean? What is it? And women do that all the time. That's their big gift. It's why they're such wonderful teachers and wonderful nurses and any kind of thing of that nature. They are simply very, very good at it. And it's because of this gift. And I think also, of course, because I'm so convinced of the physical reality of the world and of ourselves, that it's a biological characteristic, a biological gift. It's like those people that subjected those poor monkeys to wire mothers and soft mothers. Do you remember that? That man, I trust, is roasting in hell. I'm like those Christians that were supposed to look down, you know, at hell with great joy to see the suffering of sinners. I could do that with some sinners. It wouldn't be hard. Those awful people at Stanford that persuaded people to give each other high electric shocks. You remember reading about that? They lied to them. Science, you see, doesn't mind lying. And they lied because they don't believe in value systems. They don't believe in moral systems. They think that's wrong because it biases you. It certainly does. And so they have people lined up to give this person a shock if he doesn't do this and that. And then the people that they had getting the shocks, of course, weren't getting any shocks at all, but they were rousing the other people to give them shocks by not responding. And they found that these people would give them shocks enough for an electric chair, you see, trying to get them. But all through this insane game of trying to reveal to the people how wicked they were, and of course how wicked the scientists were to do that, you know, to encourage them to do this kind of thing. And the wire mothers, we wouldn't know that anybody knows that nobody wants a wire mother. I mean, really, you don't have to get the government to give you that. Raise up a whole swatch of chimpanzees to find out that anybody would rather have a soft mother than a wire mother. Honestly. And they say, now we proved it so we don't have to do it again. Hasn't been proved through the whole history of man.
No, it's a wonderful thing, but foolishness. I don't know how I got on my wire monkey.
Well, what should the role of a teacher be, recognizing this escape process of learning? I mean, what should we do?
Recognizing what?
This escape process
Oh.
of learning, what should the role of a teacher be? Should we try to get them to escape in our classes?
We're trying to get them to escape into
How do we
something
go
that
about
will strengthen them, that will speak to the human condition, that will allow them, like that thing of forgiveness, you see. If you really look at that head, the way that head is turned, it's the wire mother thing, you see. There's such warmth and such gentleness and kindness coming from the hand that the man can lean his head against his father and know that he's forgiven. Not just be forgiven, but know that he's forgiven. Well, to see that instructs you about both forgiving and being forgiven. And as I said, you may not, you almost certainly won't, because it's the most difficult lesson you can learn in the world. You know that. I mean, you can't forgive yourself. You know you can think of the ways in which you never can forgive yourself for this and that and the other thing. And maybe the people are dead that you'd have to get forgiveness from. Or maybe you couldn't get forgiveness from them, maybe because they can't forgive you. It's the most difficult thing in the world, you know. It's the most terribly difficult thing in the world. And the likelihood of her being able to do it, you can have a moment of doing it, but holding on to that moment is so outside of the usual expectation that you can have for yourself. That just to do it, just to see it for that length of time, is and to be it for that length of time, is an enormous instruction in that. And it is a pure escape. You're escaping your own limitation, your own incapacity to forgive and to be forgiven, because they're equally difficult, you know. If you happen to run into somebody who can forgive, has that compassion, you're very likely not able to forgive yourself and to accept forgiveness. So it's very, very difficult. I mean, just unbelievably demanding and difficult. And for a little moment, you can see what it means. And then you can come back to it and see it again. And then once you can recognize it, you have some, you know, some possibility of feeling it.
Do you think there are some situations where the object of art or in this literature, so it becomes not simply an instruction of what it is, but actually maybe a sacrament, a vehicle through which you actually receive? And you see a work of art, you finally feel, yes, you know, I understand, and it becomes more than simply instruction, it's something you can return to and say, yes, that's what it's like. There's a vehicle whereby you actually understand and receive.
Yes, because that's, any escape gives you an understanding of yourself, because you only, passive experience only lasts a very, you know, very brief time. It's just an immediate, unavoidable, brief thing. That you are in that for just that moment, unless it's something along like a play, I'm thinking of painting, or something along like a concert. You really lose yourself then for the whole length of the time of the concert and of the particular piece. But characteristically in visual arts, it's very difficult to hold it back, and maybe you're not intended to. But when you come back to yourself is different. And you're going to do that no matter what. And it's just whether you do it under something that properly enlarges you, or whether you don't. Now, I have no idea. And I suppose that it really is just a double thing, a paradox, the same as most things having to do with human beings. Whether experiencing the sight of cruelty encourages cruelty. It's the same thing that people talk about, you know, when they talk about the television. Whether all that violence, or fairy stories, whether all that violence actually breeds violence, or whether it dispels violence. And it probably does both. And it probably depends on the person, same as any education is what the person. And some people have a very low tolerance for violence, one side of it, and they know that that's not what they want at all. They want anything except that. And other people can feed on it more. And I don't know what's the most salutary, and I think it's something that just individuals feel and respond to. I wish I did know. I mean, you see, people always say, oh, we can't have any censorship. Well, we do have censorship in the sense that an individual may censor this and never want anything more to do with it. And is that something then that's good, and can that be extended to other people? I think it can. I think that as I say, with my long lifetime, I have at times thought that it doesn't matter.
To contradict with something about good art, offhand I can't think of many presentations in art that might be particularly the most gruesome. I mean, Picasso's Guernica or something like that. People say it's good art, and it shows tremendous violence, and I agree. And I think it's because it's good art, it makes one sick. It repulses one. Isn't there something, a character of good art that depicts the reality of the thing rather than a fantasy? I mean, Rambo is kind of a fantasy. You know, we would like to blow away our enemies and feel good about it. But we can't do that.
Well, of course, we can do.
Well, no, I think we can blow our enemies away and feel good in a certain sense in which we are not human.
Yeah.
In a sort of debased sense of feeling good. But we can't really be human, because when we feel good about blowing away other people, and we forget their humanity, and the only way we forget their humanity is forgetting our own. Isn't there something about good art that really helps us keep in touch with our humanity?
The greatest art I think that Guernica is not a good example, because it really is concerned with the kind of terrible cruelty of present-day war. And I think people have to realize that that's part of their world, and part of their reality of their life. That we're all may be destroyed as Guernica was destroyed. I think it was over Guernica that Mussolini's son dropped the bomb. And I'm not sure. So anyway, it is an obligation. I think we have to recognize that there is a terrible darkness and cruelty in human beings. It's just a terrible thing. There's also light and kindness and virtue, a real sense of virtue. And that our obligation as human beings is to strengthen the one and try to weaken the other. And the only way that the other can be weakened is by developing this vision of empathic sense, so that you cannot bring yourself to torture. You can't bring yourself to it. You couldn't do it. And people tell me, I guess somebody like Amnesty tells me, that even in the terrible tortures that go on at the present time, in which people torture other people, only some of the people can do it. And they are chosen. They can't just ask anybody to do it, because they won't. But there always are enough. And it doesn't take but 3 or 4. And then you can work them in whenever you need torture done. But you can't depend on the other people to do it. They won't do it. And if you find out the people who will, because you ask people who've never done it to do it, and if they will not do it, I mean, they will start it and they will not do it, then you just dismiss them from that obligation and bring in the people who enjoy it. So I think it's true that most of us do not enjoy torture. I think as way the majority do not enjoy it and would not do it. But the minute that you can divorce yourself from the fact that they are living beings, then you can do it, you see, and that's the only way. See, that's why I have to tell you, I'll answer you in a second, but I have to tell you that one of the things that I believe absolutely is that we are not animals. And we're not machines. We are a thing called a human being. And we are not animals in any sense of that, because we do an entirely different thing from what animals do. And we're on a whole chain of being. All life is united. I mean, there's no question in the world about the flora of being is the same, but that different species, different things come up. And we have no more right to call ourselves animals than animals have the right to call themselves vegetables. And they are not vegetables. They share certain things with vegetables, but they don't share the ability of turning sunlight into chlorophyll. They don't have that ability. They have to wait for the plants to do it, then they can live. And we are not animals. Animals cannot, as I said, look at the cat. They have not this ability. They haven't it in any way. They are perfectly indifferent to the abstract forms. And it's, that's the way it is. Now, we also have a much more complicated sense of choice than animals. Animals choose. There's no doubt about that. If you're ever around animals, you have to know that they are not automata. They are not machines any more than we are. And they may do things. I have a horse that's insane, absolutely crazy. She's like a huge number of neurotic women. She's a mare, and she has a passion to be with other horses. But the minute she's with them, she attacks them wildly. Kicks them, bites them, runs them, and becomes a mad woman. And then you take her away, screaming and howling, slapping her with a whip. She hangs over the fence, staring at me. Why can't I be with them? As you see, it's just, she has a herd instinct that horses have, and she has absolutely no capacity to live up to it. She just has this insane business that she's got to attack them all, and she does. And when I bought her, the man told me that, and I said, oh, nonsense, you just put her with the horses, and she'll be all right. Woo-hoo. That was 3 years ago. She won't. She just will not, that's all. And yet she longs to. So there she is, a victim, you see, of an imperfect instinctual response. And we can be victims of that as well, but we have infinitely more choices. And we're infinitely more conscious. We have this funny business of self-consciousness. And the animals don't really have. They know that they are. They know themselves as separate because both horses and dogs easily understand their name. They know what that means. That's my name, that's who I am. And if you call my name, I'll come, but the others won't. And that's an enormous step, isn't it? I mean, it's an enormous step. That they know their name. And of course, dogs, if they live around, they get an enormous vocabulary. Horses don't get anything. But the great thing about dogs is they have a sense of guilt, you see, and that's why they're man's best friends. Nobody else, no cat, you can't shame a cat. There's no way you can shame a cat. There's no way you can shame a horse, Suppose they throw you off, well, too bad. There's no guilt, whatever, no regret, no idea of anything of that nature at all. But a dog, I was Gideon, and he came in, and his dog had opened the door and got the dog food out, and he said, oh, look what you did. She went tearing into the other room and lay down and watched, through the table legs. Is he going to do anything? Or is he going to just fuss, It was so wonderful. She was covered with guilt. She was absolutely sick with thinking that she had done the absolutely wrong thing, and there she was. They found out. It was awful. But cats don't care at all. they care if you give them a swat, you know, and say don't do that, and they go, because they aren't sorry, and they don't have any kind of guilt at all, not a particle. And that's why they're us, that's why we have them, I think. The only other thing that has guilt that I know anything about, I don't have any goldfish, but they don't seem to be guilty.
I'm serious.
I don't know.
I had a friend that worked with pigs and dolphins.
Pigs, I'll bet pigs might get a sense of
Yeah.
guilt. Because they're very bright for one thing. And they have a different one. Maybe that's why they're so often introduced. You don't want to eat anything that's guilty. Too much like
You made a lot of negative statements about cruelty.
Yeah.
Would there be any cultures at all that would survive that didn't have the capacity for enormous amounts of cruelty?
Yes, I think so. I think they have been some.
Major societies that interact with other societies that have survived without having at least the capacity.
Well, I don't know. I'm not talking about just killing something. I'm talking about cruelty and enjoyment of cruelty.
Well, the enjoyment, I'm talking the capacity for it rather than necessarily the enjoyment.
Well, it's a very different thing to think about the harshness of the world and the necessity for death and necessity for some kinds of suffering. But that's different from cruelty, from wanting to impose it, wanting and enjoying it. That's a very special, and I think it's a very rare condition in human beings. I may be wrong, but I think it's a very rare condition to really want to. I know you always hear about it, and I think I've never heard. I've heard many times of naughty little boys teasing and destroying a cat. I've never heard of a naughty little girl doing that. And I think it's to our honor. I don't think we should imitate men for a minute. Start pulling the legs off cats. Only scientific women do it. And then people are surprised that there aren't as many women scientists as there are men. Puzzled by that. But of course, science really does not want to be involved, any science, with the interreactions and interrelationships of people and that kind of extreme personal quality. That's not what is wanted, and certainly is discouraged. It occurs. Dear poor Margaret Mead is now in such sad report because she cared about those people. Yes.
Indicate that you suggest an antipathy between the humanities and the sciences, to say the least. You said earlier that the...
It's a choice of science.
Yeah,
They
but-
aim not to be perfect.
Yeah, well, I'm in humanities, so I
And
have no problem. But you also said earlier something about the through science and mathematics, one can achieve this kind of escape. Is it an escape that's value-free, or is it only through the humanities that one, through this escape, achieves values, or
No, you can escape.
do they have values? I mean, are there values involved in sciences, or is that a kind of problem that when you escape into the sciences, you kind of leave? I mean, obviously you can escape into even the arts, as you said, because you perform art for art's sake and that sort of idea, and get away from values. But do you think it's more typical because of the nature of science or mathematics that when you escape into those realms, you don't achieve the values you might achieve in humanities?
I think you can absolutely can lose yourself in that. That's our great capacity to do it. We can do it. Nature, very easily, constantly. Just in the sight of a tree, you all empathize with nature all the time, and you know it. And if I say to you, willow tree, how do you feel? And then I say pine tree. And you feel different inside just by those words. And if I say, I'm just like a pine tree, you say you are not. You know, you're not at all. Because we know that you're being more willowy. And literally, as we say willowy, you know, doing like that, you're not piney at all. So you can escape. You escape emphatically, and you can escape everywhere into some study or something. There's no question about it. But it is not what the arts offer is a refinement of feeling, a recognition of refinement of feeling, and rebellion. And that's what they are based on. They only exist because of that. And therefore, we experience it from the outside. The aim of science is against that. The aim of it is toward impersonality and toward generality, toward everything being able to be general. See, to a real, proper, and good and virtuous scientist who has not been corrupted by any of the arts, he will know that the individual instance, the unique event, is unimportant. You can say, I saw an angel appear to me and handed me a lovely rose this afternoon. And they say, yes, I think she believes that, and it may even have happened. But unless it happens again, unless I can get that angel to appear again, and in fact several times under ideal circumstances which I can watch, it's unimportant. It's not that I think it doesn't exist, it's just unimportant. Because it's a unique event, occurring to a unique feeling. Well, you see, that's all that art is about. It's about unique events occurring to unique beings. And that makes a very enormous difference in what can happen.
Yeah, the distinction is really one more degree than of totality, the way you're painting it, because in fact science is done by human beings. And we go into it because of the same feelings and emotions that are elicited by art.
I entirely agree with you.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I'll get a bit of a nice
No, and it has, I entirely agree with you, but the only difference, the major difference is in one aims to repress those very things that made you enter into it.
No, that's just the clinical side, the technical side of science. So we
because
should
you cannot act
differentiate.
except as a unique being, so it doesn't matter, you know, that you say I'm.
In fact, what concerns scientists the most are three great unique occurrences. The creation of the universe, the creation of life, which is DNA and all that, the creation of man's mind. All three unique occurrences and are the three passions of the scientists. The physicists,
But they have this
biologists,
wonderful feeling that they're in a terrible state about the creation of the world. I mean about the universe, creation of the universe, because it is not anything that can ever be proved scientifically.
But that's the passion.
And that's the passion of it. I
That's
agree with you.
the art
That's
side
it.
of it.
But you see, in doing that, they're abandoning their real, and that is the positivist position, which is that this.
Well, positivism is good.
Oh, I know it, but it never dies, you know, it just goes into retreat for a while. It comes out again twice as strong. So, they're never going to be able to create a universe
Granted.
at the time. And they're not going to be able to watch another one, we can assume. But they still cannot leave it alone. I mean, it's like
Right, that's because we are human.
and the same.
So,
Yeah,
right,
that's
so
right. Absolutely.
you're right.
And often their laws, even mathematical laws, are chosen on aesthetics.
Oh, yes, and absolutely. In fact, the greatest definition of beauty that I know, and I wish I had it to give it to you, is in the introduction of a man named Hardy to a book on mathematics, in which he gives a definition of beauty that seems to me the most valuable definition I've ever read in my life. And at a time when the word beauty is so completely out of style and so it's so devalued that it's something that it's a good thing to know that there is such a thing as beauty, and it has certain characteristics. And one of them is a certain difficulty and a kind of depth, a sense of depth. And this is about what mathematical equations are acceptable. And he said there's no acceptance in mathematics of the equation. Now, that was written a while ago, because now science approves of and enjoys and actually stimulates ugly equations. It's a real reversal.
Those are usually inferred. They will eventually come across the G equals MC squared.
Yes, but it's not a way in which you can say this is so ugly it can't be true. And that's what Hardy is essentially saying. That mathematics has a beauty which is so inherent in its nature that if it is ugly, it is not true. And see, that's an extraordinary idea. That's what people used to say about art. But they don't, of course, nobody says that anymore. In fact, that we have a terrible feeling that anything which is ugly is more real than anything which is beautiful. We absolutely have that feeling. And that to be concerned with beauty is to be a terrible kind of frivolous person, because we think of beauty as prettiness, and we don't recognize that beauty is something which is profound and extraordinary and a great gift of God. And therefore we devalue it. We just don't like it, you know.
There's an argument on the other side of your comparison of art and science too, in that you were saying that science has to do with general and art is specific, and yet art's specificity has to do with the universal, which is what makes it art, and therefore it is generalized, not your cat on the wall.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And the thing that I am saying in that difference is that there's no concern or respect for the unique event. And, to a great extent, I'm not thinking of the great laboratory sciences at all. I'm thinking of the general attitude or belief or basic belief of science, which of course dominates the 20th century. There's no question at all. There's no question. If you didn't know it, all you have to do is teach in the university, and you see that the scientists get all the money, and and that's the first thing. And they get all the kudos, and that's the second thing. And if you imagine that the humanities are going to get it, they're only going to get it insofar as they can try to persuade people that they are really scientists. Exactly true. If they count enough letters in the sonnets of Shakespeare, or count enough whatever, because they're absolutely Descartesian. The poor humanities are trying to be scientific, or Descartesian. They just think you've got to measure and weigh everything. There's nothing which is outside of what you can measure is real. Scientists, of course, don't think that.